The Watcher in the Empire of Shadows, The Chronicles of Daniel, Part 1. The death of the city of David. The end of the world did not come with a whimper. It came with the roar of a lion. It was the year 605 BC, and the summer heat hung heavy over the limestone hills of Judea. For months, the people of Jerusalem had lived in the shadow of fear. They had stood upon the high walls, watching the eastern horizon, hoping against hope that the dust clouds rising there were merely storms born of the desert wind. But deep down they knew they were not storms of wind and sand. They were storms of iron, bronze, and blood. Nebuchadnezzar, the young and ferocious king of Babylon, the hammer of the whole earth, had come. The siege had been brutal, a tightening noose around the neck of the holy city, and now the walls were breached. The sound was deafening, the crash of battering rams against cedar gates, the screams of the dying, the guttural war cries of the Chaldean soldiers. Smoke, thick and greasy black, choked the sky, blotting out the sun as if God himself had turned his face away from his people. In the midst of the chaos, amidst the rubble of what was once the glory of Solomon, a young man stood in chains. Daniel was barely 18, a scion of the nobility, raised in the courts of King Jehoiakim. He was a student of the Torah, a young man who had grown up listening to the weeping of the prophet Jeremiah in the streets. He remembered the old prophet's voice, cracking with grief, warning that this day would come. "Submit to the yoke of Babylon," Jeremiah had cried, "for this is the judgment of the Lord." The princes had laughed. They had pointed to the temple, claiming that Yahweh would never let his house fall. Now Daniel watched as Babylonian soldiers laughed while dragging the massive golden lampstands out of the sanctuary. He watched as the bronze sea, the altar, and the sacred vessels consecrated by the prayers of generations were tossed onto ox carts like common loot. The pain in Daniel's chest was physical, a sharp shard of ice in his heart. It wasn't just the loss of his home. It was the theological crisis that threatened to swallow him whole. Has God failed? He wondered, the ash of the city coating his tongue. Has Marduk, the god of Babylon, defeated Yahweh? Is the covenant broken? A soldier's rough hand shoved him forward. "Move, Jew." Daniel stumbled, the heavy iron chains biting into his wrists. He looked to his left and right. There were others: Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were the best and brightest of Judah's youth, the sons of princes and nobles. They were not being killed, they were being collected. They were trophies, human livestock to be paraded in the capital of the conqueror, to show the world that the God of Israel was dead. As the long march began, leaving the smoking ruins of Jerusalem behind, Daniel looked back one last time. The temple was a torch illuminating the twilight. The walls were rubble. But as he turned his face toward the endless eastern desert, a strange, quiet resolve settled into the marrow of his bones. Jeremiah had said this was God's doing. If it was God's doing, then God was still in control, even in the chains, even in the defeat. The journey was a nightmare of blistering heat and exhaustion. They crossed the Syrian desert, a landscape of unforgiving emptiness. For weeks, they walked, their sandals wearing thin, their lips cracked, but Daniel did not speak of despair. He whispered psalms under his breath, tethering his mind to the anchor of his fathers. Part 2. The golden cage of Babylon. Finally, the desert gave way to the fertile crescent. The brown dust turned to green fields, watered by the mighty Euphrates. And then, rising from the plains like a mountain range built by human hands, appeared Babylon. It was a city that defied the imagination of the rustic Judeans. To their eyes, accustomed to the stone simplicity of Jerusalem, Babylon was terrifyingly magnificent. The walls were so thick that 4-horse chariots raced atop them. The Euphrates River flowed directly through the center of the city, channeled by massive levees. And looming over it all was the Etemenanke, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, which pierced the sky, a man-made Tower of Babel reborn. They were marched through the Ishtar Gate, a towering portal of blue-glazed bricks adorned with golden dragons and bulls in relief. The sensory overload was absolute. The air smelled of exotic spices, roasting meats, river mud, and the sweat of a million souls. The noise was a cacophony of a dozen languages. This was the center of the world. This was the belly of the beast. They were taken to the royal palace, a sprawling complex of luxury that made the courts of Judah look like shepherds' tents. There, they were stripped of their ragged clothes, washed in perfumed oils, and dressed in the fine linen of the Chaldeans. Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, stood before them. He was a man of immense power, his face smooth and unreadable, his eyes sharp. He inspected them as one inspects prize stallions. "You have been chosen," Ashpenaz announced, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "You are no longer sons of Judah. You are now the property of King Nebuchadnezzar. You will stand in the king's palace. You will learn the tongue of the Chaldeans. You will master the mathematics of the stars, the history of the empires, and the magic of the priests." Then came the erasure. The first step of assimilation is the destruction of identity. "To serve the king, you must be reborn," Ashpenaz said. "Your names, which bind you to your old god, are gone." He pointed a finger at Daniel. Your name was Daniel. God is my judge." That is a lie. Here, the king is your judge. "You shall be called Belshazzar, lady. Protect the king's life." He turned to Hananiah. "You shall be Shadrach, the commander of Aku, the moon god." To Mishael, "You shall be Meshach, who is what Aku is." To Azariah, "You shall be Abednego, servant of Nabu, the god of writing." The young men stood silent. The intent was clear: cultural genocide. Babylon did not just want their service, it wanted their souls. It wanted to rewrite their mental landscape until the memory of Yahweh was nothing but a ghost. But Daniel looked at his friends, and a silent communication passed between them. "They can change our labels," Daniel thought, "but they cannot change our owner." Part 3. The War of the Diet. The indoctrination was total. They were immersed in Babylonian science, literature, and occultism. But the true test came not in the classroom, but at the dinner table. The king's table was a display of imperial excess. It was laden with the finest wines from the Zagros mountains and meats sacrificed on the altars of Marduk. To eat from the king's table was a covenant. It was a ritual of communion, signifying that one's life was sustained by the king and his gods. For a strict Jew, it was an abomination. The meat was unclean, not slaughtered according to the Levitical law. The wine was a libation to demons. The aroma of roasted pork and spiced wine filled the mess hall. The other captives ate ravenously, grateful to be fed after the starvation of the march. Daniel stood by the wall, his stomach cramping with hunger, his heart pounding. It would be so easy to eat, who would know? God's temple was destroyed, the priests were dead. Was the law even valid here, 1,000 miles from the promised land? Survival dictated compliance. But Daniel realized something profound. If I compromise now, in the secret place, I will compromise later in the public place. If I cannot say no to a piece of meat, how will I say no to an idol? He approached Ashpenaz. The chief eunuch respected Daniel. There was a nobility in the boy that even a Babylonian could recognize. "I cannot eat this," Daniel said softly. Ashpenaz's eyes widened. "Belteshazzar, do you seek death? I fear my lord the king. He has assigned your food. If he sees you looking pale and thin compared to the other youths, he will have my head." Daniel turned to the guard, Melzar, who had been appointed over them. He proposed a test, a scientific challenge in the court of mystics. "Test your servants for 10 days, Daniel said, his voice steady. "Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." Melzar hesitated, then shrugged. 10 days, what could it hurt? For 10 days, while the other trainees gorged themselves on the fat of the empire. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah ate pulse lentils, beans, seeds, and drank clear water. It was a fast. Every meal was a prayer. As they chewed the tasteless food, they fed on the promises of Scripture. Man shall not live by bread alone, Moses had written. They were proving it. On the 10th day, Melzar lined them up. The other youths were sluggish, their eyes clouded with wine, their skin greasy, but Daniel and his friends stood tall. Their skin glowed with vitality, their eyes were clear, sharp, and intelligent. They looked stronger, healthier, and more vibrant than those fed by the king. God had honored the resistance. It was the first victory in a long war. They had drawn a line in the sand, and heaven had met them there. Part 4. The Forgotten Dream and the Axe. 2 years passed. Daniel rose in the ranks, his mind sharpening like a blade. God gave him understanding in all visions and dreams, a gift that lay dormant, waiting for the crisis. The crisis came in the middle of the night. King Nebuchadnezzar awoke with a scream stuck in his throat. He sat up in his golden bed, sweat pouring down his face, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird he had dreamed. It was a vision of such terrifying magnitude that it felt heavier than the world itself. But and this was the horror. The moment he awoke, the dream vanished. The terror remained, but the image was gone. The king was a man used to absolute control. This loss of control drove him into a paranoid rage. He summoned the Magi, the astrologers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans. They gathered in the throne room, sensing the king's instability. "I have had a dream," Nebuchadnezzar growled, pacing the floor like a caged lion. "And my spirit is anxious to know the dream." The Chaldeans answered in Aramaic, smooth and practiced. "O king, live forever, tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." Nebuchadnezzar stopped. He looked at them with cold, predator eyes. He realized that if he told them the dream, they could invent any meaning they wanted. They were charlatans. "The decision is firm," the king announced. "If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap." The room went cold. The wisest men of Babylon stammered. "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. Only the gods can show this, and they do not dwell with flesh." "Then you are all useless," Nebuchadnezzar roared. "Kill them all." The decree went out. The executioners sharpened their swords. Arioch, the captain of the guard, marched to the quarters of the wise men to begin the slaughter. He came to Daniel's door. Daniel opened it. Seeing the drawn sword, he did not panic. "Why is the decree so urgent from the king?" Upon hearing the madness, Daniel did the unthinkable. He went to the palace. He walked past the guards, into the presence of the tyrant, and asked for time. It was a gamble of immense proportions. He returned to his small house and found his 3 friends. "We must pray," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "We must plead for mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, lest we perish with the rest of Babylon." That night, 4 young men knelt on the floor of a pagan city and assaulted the gates of heaven. They had no sacrifice to offer, no priest to intercede. They had only their desperate faith. They prayed not just for their lives, but for the witness of God in the darkness. And in the deep silence of the night, the vision came. The veil was torn. Daniel saw what the king had seen. He saw the sweep of history. He saw the end of days. The next morning, Daniel stood before Nebuchadnezzar. The king looked down from his high throne, bags under his eyes. "Are you able to make known to me the dream?" Daniel stood straight. "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets." Daniel described the dream, a colossal statue standing in the plains of history, a head of fine gold, chest and arms of silver. belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet mixed of iron and clay. You watched, Daniel said, his voice ringing with power, until a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the wind carried them away like chaff, and the stone became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Nebuchadnezzar sat frozen. It was exactly what he had seen. Daniel interpreted it. Babylon was the gold. After them would come Persia silver, Greece bronze, and Rome iron. And finally, in the days of the last kings, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that would never be destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the known world, the man worshipped as a god, climbed down from his throne and fell on his face before the young Hebrew. Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets. For a moment, the light of truth shone in Babylon, but darkness is stubborn. Part V, the plain of Dura and the fourth man. Time passed. Nebuchadnezzar's humility faded, replaced by the intoxication of power. He remembered Daniel said he was the head of gold. He liked that part. He ignored the part about his kingdom ending. He decided to defy the prophecy. He built a statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, entirely of gold. It was a statement: my kingdom will not pass to silver or bronze. It will be gold forever. He set it up on the plain of Dura. He issued a command: when the orchestra plays the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, every knee must bow. The penalty for refusal was death by fire. The day came. The sun beat down on the golden monstrosity, making it blaze like a second sun. Thousands of officials gathered. The music struck up, a discordant wall of sound. Like a wave, the crowd collapsed. Thousands of foreheads touched the dust, but in the sea of prostrate bodies, 3 figures remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood like iron pillars. They were conspicuous, they were suicidal, they were dragged before the king. Nebuchadnezzar was apoplectic. To defy the statue was to defy him. Is it true? He hissed. If you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? The 3 young men looked at the furnace. It was a brick kiln, stoked to a white heat. They looked at the king. They did not tremble. O Nebuchadnezzar, they said, their voices calm, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. Then came the words that shook the foundations of hell. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. But if not, their faith was not a contract for safety. It was allegiance unto death. The king's face twisted into a mask of fury. Heat the furnace 7 times more than usual. The heat was so intense that the soldiers who threw them in were scorched to death instantly. The 3 Hebrews fell, bound, into the roaring heart of the fire. Nebuchadnezzar sat on his portable throne, watching for the satisfaction of seeing them turn to ash. He peered into the flames. He blinked. He stood up, trembling. Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? He asked his counselors. True, O king, look. The king shouted, his voice cracking. I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. And they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Inside the furnace, it was cool. The fire had burned away their ropes, but it had not touched their hair or their clothes. And walking with them was a figure of light, the pre-incarnate Christ, holding the flames at bay. He had not saved them from the fire. He had saved them in the fire. Nebuchadnezzar approached the mouth of the furnace. Servants of the Most High God, come out. They stepped out. They didn't even smell of smoke. The king blessed their God, but the seeds of his madness were already sown. Part VA, The Madness and the Feast. Years rolled by. Nebuchadnezzar walked on the roof of his palace. The hanging gardens bloomed beneath him. The city walls stretched for miles. He felt invincible. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? The words were an invitation to judgment. A voice fell from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. In an instant, the light of reason was snuffed out. The king's mind fractured. He tore off his royal robes. He began to grunt and howl. He ran from the palace, driven by a primal madness known as boanthropy, believing himself to be an ox. For 7 years, the throne of Babylon was empty. The greatest king on earth lived in the fields. His hair grew matted like eagle feathers. His nails curled into talons. He ate grass. He slept under the cold dew of heaven. He was a living lesson to the universe. Pride goes before destruction. Daniel surely watched over the kingdom during this time, waiting, praying. At the end of 7 years, the king looked up, the fog lifted, reason returned. He stood up, shook the dust from his matted hair, and spoke not a boast, but a praise. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. He was restored to his throne, but he was a different man. He had learned that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men. Part 7, The Hand of Doom. Time is a relentless river. Nebuchadnezzar died. His successors were weak and cruel. Finally, Belshazzar sat on the throne. He was a man of small character and deep arrogance. It was the twilight of the empire. 539 BC, the armies of Cyrus the Great, the Persians, were surrounding Babylon, but Belshazzar was not afraid. The walls were impenetrable. He threw a feast, a party for 1,000 nobles. As the wine flowed and the music pounded, Belshazzar committed the ultimate sacrilege. Bring the vessels of the Hebrew god, he commanded. They brought the golden cups from Solomon's temple. The king, his wives, and his concubines drank wine from the cups consecrated to Yahweh. They toasted the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. It was the ultimate blasphemy. Suddenly, the music died. A hush fell over the great hall. Near the lampstand, where the light was brightest, a hand appeared. Not a ghost, but a hand of flesh and bone, floating in the air. Its fingers began to write on the plaster wall, scritch, scritch, scritch. Belshazzar's face turned gray, his knees knocked together. He watched as the hand wrote for words of fire and vanished. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. The wise men failed again. The queen mother called for Daniel. The old prophet walked in. He was in his 80s now, his hair white, his face lined with the history of empires. He looked at the terrified king with pity and sternness. Keep your gifts, Daniel said, waving away the offer of purple robes and gold chains. I will read the writing for the king. He reminded Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's madness. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. He turned to the wall. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, the prophecy was fulfilled. The Persians diverted the Euphrates River, marching under the city gates on the dry riverbed. The impregnable city fell without a battle. Belshazzar was slain in his banquet hall, the wine of idolatry still on his lips. Babylon fell in a single night. Part 8, The Silence of the Lions. A new era began. Darius the Mede took the throne. He was a practical man, and he saw in Daniel a genius for administration. He planned to set the old Jew over the entire kingdom. Envy is a poison, that rots the bones. The Persian satraps hated Daniel. They hated his integrity, his foreign God, his success. They conspired to destroy him. They found no corruption in him. We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. They appealed to Darius's vanity. O king, sign a decree. For 30 days, no petition shall be made to any god or man but you. Whoever disobeys shall be cast into the den of lions. Darius, blind to the trap, signed it. The law of the Medes and Persians was irrevocable. Daniel heard the decree. He knew the penalty. He went home to his upper room. He opened his windows toward Jerusalem, a city that was still ruins, but still holy. He did not hide. He knelt down. He prayed aloud 3 times a day. The spies caught him. They dragged him before the king. Darius was devastated. He spent the day trying to find a legal loophole, but the law was iron. At sunset, the soldiers came. They took the old prophet to the mouth of the pit. May your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you, Darius whispered, hoping against hope. They threw the old man in. A stone was rolled over the mouth. Inside the darkness, Daniel landed on the dusty floor. He could smell the musk of the lions, the stench of rotting meat. He heard the low, rumbling growls. He saw the yellow eyes flashing in the dark. Daniel stood still. He had faced kings, demons, and time itself. He was not afraid of cats. Then a light filled the den. An angel stood there, sword drawn, radiant as a star. The angel touched the lions. Their jaws snapped shut, locked by divine power. Their aggression melted. The great beasts lay down. Daniel sat among them. He stroked their manes. He slept with his head on the flank of a lioness. The pit of death became a cathedral of peace. In the morning, the king ran to the den. Daniel, has your God been able to deliver you? Daniel's voice rose, strong and clear. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. Daniel was pulled out, unharmed. The conspirators were thrown in, and before they hit the floor, the lions tore them apart. Part 9. The Visions of the End. Daniel lived out his days in service to the empire, but his heart lived in the future. In his later years, the walls of time became translucent. He stood by the Tigris River and saw a man clothed in linen, whose face was like lightning and eyes like torches of fire. The men with him fled in terror, but Daniel fell on his face. The angel showed him the book of truth. He saw the march of centuries. He saw kings of the north and south fighting. He saw a despicable king who would arise in the end times, who would desecrate the sanctuary and set up the abomination of desolation. He saw a time of troubles, such as never was since there was a nation. But he also saw the Ancient of Days. He saw a throne of fire. He saw the books opened. He saw the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, given a dominion that is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. Go your way, Daniel, the angel told him. For the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white and refined. But the wicked shall do wickedly. You shall rest, the angel promised, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Epilogue. The stone cut without hands. Daniel died in exile, a stranger in a strange land. He never saw the rebuilt walls of Jerusalem, but he saw further than any man of his time. He saw that empires are like chaff, gold, silver, bronze, iron blown away by the wind of eternity. He saw that kings are mere actors on a stage set by the Most High, and he saw the stone cut without hands, that would strike the feet of the Colossus and fill the whole earth. His story echoes through the corridors of time, a testament to the power of purity in a corrupt world. It reminds us that even when the fire is hot, the fourth man is there. Even when the lions roar, the angel is there. And even when the world seems to be falling apart, the Ancient of Days sits on his throne, and his kingdom shall have no end. The sun set over the grave of the prophet, but the light of his visions burns on, a beacon for all who wait for the Son of Man.